Welcome to another installment of Downfall, a series where we examine the unfortunate downfall of a once beloved video game franchise. Today's episode is for everyone out there who pines for the days when sports games threw the rulebook out the window in favor of some good old-fashioned American violence. We're going to take a look at the not-so-wholesome family fun of NFL Blitz. As it turns out, the question of what happened to NFL Blitz leads to some much bigger questions, such as what happened to the action sports genre? Where did all the football games go? And maybe the most important, how the hell did NFL Blitz get made in the first place? We're going to answer all those in this video, especially the last question because holy god, that is a story. Let's turn the clock back. Rather than creating realistic sports simulations, Midway began filling arcades with over-the-top reimaginings of various sports. For example, 1988 Cyberball took the basics of football and threw in some robots and an exploding ball, because why not? Midway continued to refine that general idea, quickly finding their stride with games like Arch Rivals and High Impact. Rather than take Cyberball's fantastical route, these games simply cranked up the attitude by peppering in more illegal plays and trash talking to normal sports games. They were essentially satirical characters of sports, exaggerating up the juicy stuff while holding back the more technical aspects. That formula eventually paid off in the form of NBA Jam, a 2-on-2 basketball game heavily based around superhuman dunking. It was like playing as Michael Jordan on steroids, or sick to death with the flu. Either way, the game was a slam dunk, with cabinets eating up over $1 billion in quarters by 1994. With a winning recipe for success on their hands, Midway went for the alley-oop. Okay, side note, I have no idea what sports are, so let's pretend all these references make sense. Okay, cool, thanks. NBA Jam's head honcho Max Turmel next turned his attention to football. And here's where things get incredible. Back in 2014, Vice Sports ran a feature explaining the absurd history of Blitz development process. Basically, the NFL agreed to let Midway use their license to create a football equivalent to NBA Jam, putting in an extraordinary amount of faith in Midway. The NFL just sort of let the game company do their thing and didn't really think to check up on how their name was being used. That was until 1 week before NFL Blitz was supposed to launch. NFL representatives paid Midway a visit to check up on the game and were shocked to find that NFL Blitz was almost as much of a wrestling game as it was a football game. Worried about how that violence would reflect on their brand, the NFL representatives tried to scrub their names from the game on the spot, offering to refund Midway for their license. Through some sort of flea flicker or curveball or some sports thing, I don't know, Turmel somehow managed to convince the representatives that violence was key to football and that the NFL should let them celebrate that. The NFL somehow said okay to that, asking for various compromises so that Blitz would be less of a murder simulation than it was. Additionally, they asked for a video showing every violent action in the game. Midway kind of complied, sending them a reel straight from the editor's tool, which were completely devoid of any context. The NFL just saw outlines of people moving over black space, and somehow they were okay with that. So let's just applaud Midway for a second, because that story puts Ocean's 11 to shame. Like NBA Jam, Blitz was a hit and it spawned more sequels than you possibly knew existed. The game's console debut even sold more than a little game called Madden. Unfortunately, Blitz's rise started in the 90s, right when debates about video game violence were raging, thanks in no small part to games like Midway's own Mortal Kombat. Blitz found itself embroiled in controversy. We can't imagine why, and naturally, the NFL's involvement didn't help matters much either, as football itself was under similar scrutiny. It's hard to say whether such controversy helped or hurt Midway, but it didn't seem to stop the series' momentum, as a new game launched every year through 2003. Midway's breed of action sport games had become a staple of the market, allegedly destroying the poor, impressionable youth with bad sportsmanship and suplexes. But the sports game industry was about to drastically change. In 2004, the NFL announced that they had given EA exclusive rights to the NFL brand. While that didn't mean that no one else could make a football game, it did mean that no one could use real team names or players. And that's a big deal. Players love sports games because it lets them play as their favorite teams and athletes. giving them the power to create fantasy matchups. But perhaps more importantly, access to these things help justify the yearly cycle that Madden enjoys. Since rosters are being updated every year, EA is able to convince football fans to pick up a new disc every year to get the most accurate, up-to-date simulation experience. Without that hook, Blitz might as well be Cyberball. Trying to make Gatorade out of footballs, Midway rebranded the series as Blitz, the league. No longer needing to appease the NFL, the Blitz was meaner than ever. Midway ramped up the satire here, making direct references to real NFL controversies and also including exploding testicles. The leash was off, and apparently Midway was hyped to show gamers how psychopathic they really were. The concept was somewhat brilliant. Midway essentially used the NFL's "screw you" against them, turning Blitz into a direct jab at their competition. They even saved a buttload of money since they no longer had to pay a dime to the NFL. Unfortunately, the gameplay wasn't as highly regarded as Madden, which had spent nearly 2 decades refining its mechanics. The league sold well enough, but Madden games continued to come out every year, staying fresh in the players' minds, while years passed before Blitz the League 2 hit shelves. Once it did, interest in the franchise seemed to have disappeared entirely. It's hard to say what exactly led to the game's dismal sales. Was it the time gap? Mediocre reviews? Or had the kids who grew up loving Blitz just grow up? Maybe the action sports trends was just a product of 90s aggression, holding the same appeal as Nirvana or the WWF's Attitude Era. But that was the least of Midway's problem. By the late 2000s, things started getting complicated for the company. Midway got hit with everything that could be bad for business. Poor sales, lawsuits, corporate shakeups, you name it. That led to closures, cost-cutting, bankruptcy, and a slow death for a company that was once considered to be a top name in gaming. Like vultures to a digital carcass, companies started buying up Midway's studios and assets, with Warner Brothers getting a big chunk of Midway's corpse, including Mortal Kombat. So what happened to Blitz in that shuffle? Take a guess, and keep in mind that the gaming industry is a gigantic mess. Yup, that's right. EA picked up the rights to both NBA Jam and NFL Blitz. The company that essentially drove Midway out of the sports market had now plucked their intellectual property from their cold, dead hands and set out to revive them. NBA Jam came first with a 2010 installment, which, lo and behold, Mark Turnwell, the Jam Daddy himself, served as a consultant on. And then 2 years later, Blitz got its own revival. And since the NFL now worked exclusively with EA, Blitz got its NFL license back. And that meant that the NFL had control once again, scrubbing away the ruthless satire of the league and restoring the series to a mostly harmless arcade game, better representing the NFL's squeaky clean record. While the Blitz remake was praised as a return to form, EA didn't capitalize on it beyond this. There was no Blitz 2013. There were hardly even updates to Blitz 2012 at all. Essentially, EA just released the game as a one-time nostalgia trip and called it a day. And maybe they had the right idea all along. Did there ever need to be more than one Blitz game in the first place? Blitz was something of a one-trick pony. Granted, it did that one trick with violent horse-kicking grace, but the game wasn't meant to be as complex as actual football. It didn't need a realistic graphics boost, more in-depth mechanics, or up-to-date rule changes, because it wasn't actually a football simulator. It was a game that allowed you to pile-drive the living crap out of friends and football stars alike. Midway managed to milk that gimmick for a decade, but there's a reason that the NFL is an American institution and the XFL lasted one disastrous season. So there's no need to mourn Blitz. The original game still exists for anyone looking to dust off their N64 and enjoy the wholesome, simple pleasure of decimating wide receivers. And fortunately, no testicles exploded in that game. Here's to the good old days.